This episode is brought to you by some amazing people. Patrick O'Leary, Taban R., Gary T., Eddie Tab, Diane Boss, Mecca Mickey, T-Bone, Jeanette Angel, Kelly Lewis, Richard and Fern Harrison, Nathan from The Quantum Show, Sir Brian Bowden, Prepper 88 M Wife Patriot, Gwen Hunt, Jeff Up North, Cloudwalker, Mike Ozzie, Marvelous Marvin, Samantha Morris the Cat, Brian R., Carnundrum, Helen of Crystals, and Joanne, Jay Grove, Woo Writers DG, Timoth Man, Periwinkle Pixie, Enzo C., Shelley Montgomery, Aaron's Energy 313, Multifaceted Jules, Eric Booth, and the Diz Loki. And a special thank you to all of our subscribers on YouTube, Spotify, and now over on Rumble. If you wish to support the podcast, you can hit that join button below to become an Eyes to That Sky member. Or if you want to join our Patreon or to provide other support, the links are below in the show description. But for now, on with the show. Welcome to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast, where we explore the unexplained and mysterious phenomena that have occurred throughout the state of Michigan and beyond.
From UFO sightings to ghostly encounters, we delve deep into the stories, the evidence, and the theories behind these strange events.
We are your hosts. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Wayne.
We are an educator duo that after an encounter with a triangular UFO in 2018 in Michigan, we decided to investigate UFOs and the paranormal. In this podcast, we will be speaking with eyewitnesses, experts, and researchers to uncover the truth about some of the most intriguing cases of paranormal activity in and around Michigan.
Our goal is not to convince anyone of the existence of these phenomena, but rather to provide a platform for discussion and exploration. So, buckle up and join us on this journey down the paranormal rabbit hole.
On an escalator.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to an early edition, thanks to the Super Bowl. But it is Sunday, February 9th, 2025, and we are coming to you from deep within our bunker. Never mind the light from the windows. In the twilight, of the great Motor City, Detroit, Michigan. And we want to thank you for joining us on this very special episode as we get into the zone. But Michelle, some quick housekeeping.
Nice play on words there. So remember, if you have a story that you would like to tell, or if you would like to email the show, please do so at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com.
That's right. And also, if you want to make a donation to the podcast, you can do so with PayPal, Super Chats, buy us a coffee, check out our merchandise store. By the way, thanks T-Bone for buying that sticker and t-shirt. We appreciate it. And or you can join our Patreon. All those links can be found below. And also, as you noticed in the beginning of the show, and you will see at the end, if you become a YouTube member or a Patreon member, you get a shout out during the intro and in our credits listed at the end of the show as a thank you for our support. Michelle, you want this next one?
I don't know. Do I want this next one?
I don't know. Do you want to take it?
Well, how about this? I'm going to skip ahead. So next week, February 16th, we are going to have our returning guest demonologist. Nathaniel Gillis is coming back with us. I'm sure we're going to end up talking about UFOs, aliens, demons, angels, and the paranormal.
Ezekiel's wheel.
Remember, don't forget to hit.
No.
Not hit.
You got to smash
that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share us out. We need YouTube to realize the paradigm is changing and the time of censoring alternative theories is over.
That's right.
So, and you guys can make that happen.
Yes, definitely you guys can make that happen. So, Michelle, why don't you go ahead and let's start talking about who's here in chat right now.
Well, we are going to say hello to Taban R is with us today. Guy Merritt has joined us today and hope he is feeling a whole lot better. We've got EA, we've got and Joe Redman has joined.
Cool. Cool. And I know it's a weird time for everybody for our show, but it is Super Bowl Sunday and we had to pull out some different stops and everything. But if you miss the show, obviously it'll be on Spotify, it will be iTunes, it'll be everywhere. Plus it'll always be on the YouTube channel and over on Rumble and stuck away in our little Facebook group there, all 9,000 people. So anyways, we're going to get to the bottom of some of the beginning of this paranormal stuff that's going on. It's funny because we've been watching shows over the last couple days and
to refresh your mind, because I've seen all of the episodes of Twilight Zone.
It's just been a very long time.
Well, over the span of my lifetime, especially back during my teenage years, rewatching some of the original episodes.
And man, I want to say prophetic comes to mind when it comes to Rod Serling and the Twilight Zone. Just, was he kind of a pop culture prophet, or are humans so easily predictable because we are creatures of habit and our psychology is
all of the above?
Well, we think we're the greatest thing since sliced bread, and well, I think we're too predictable,
and then we become our own monsters.
Oh yeah, which we're going to talk about. So to bring on one of probably the best people to talk about this is our next guest, and that person is Arlen Schumer. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about paranormal stuff, ghosts and UFOs and all this. Plus, Michelle and I had our own experience when it comes to UFOs that kind of kicked this whole thing off. And it was nothing I've ever seen before in and Michelle as well, in a television show of any kind that we experienced. But I had this weird, I don't know, some high strangeness kind of hit me when I was going through your book. And I asked Michelle about this. Yes, by the way, the 5 themes of the Twilight Zone. You can find links to Arlen's website down in our description. And you should order the book from him and not Amazon. You'll get it signed if you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things I noticed, and I don't know if we want to call this the Mandela effect or what, but when I grew up, and Michelle even said the same thing, maybe it's a Michigan thing, I don't know, but it was always Rod Serling, not Rod Serling. And I'm wondering, have you heard this before from people? And like this weird Mandela effect? I mean, did they change it and we didn't know? What the hell's going on here?
It's just that because of Sterling Silver, people to this day still mistake his name. They mistake it in print and online. And you just have to remind people that it's Serling, not Sterling.
I was like looking at Michelle and I'm going, we're in the Mandela effect here. Cause I swear to God, Berenstain, we have the Berenstain Bears and all of this stuff. And I'm like, wasn't it Rod Serling?
Look at the fact that Michiganders pronounce Kroger's,
everything
and
Myers.
Everything has an S at the
end. I'm telling you, people mistake Serling and Sterling everywhere. Believe me, it ain't a Michigan thing.
Okay.
But I think what's more salient is that coming on your show, and it's about the paranormal and all the things that you talked about in the 5-minute preamble and UFOs and otherworldly beings and everything that this culture is all about. Serling, through the Twilight Zone, introduced those concepts to the American culture, to the post-war, through television, this relatively new medium. And the word itself, paranormal, people think the Twilight Zone was just a science fiction show. Well, that was the foundation. They think it was a fantasy show or a horror show. There were elements of all three. But I posit in my book that above all those, the Twilight Zone was surrealism on television. And the word surreal, the French word, means on top of reality, paranormal. The surrealists and Serling wanted people to step back from their reality and look at it from a new vantage point, from a different vantage point, for either good or for ill, to learn about yourself, to create a new reality. That's what these great episodes were about, and that's what Serling and company, the great science fiction writers, Richard Matheson, Charles Beaumont, George Clayton Johnson, their episodes were about all of the great topics, not just the paranormal and the surreal, but life and death, good and evil, God and man and woman, man and society. All of these great themes and great topics are why we're still talking about the Twilight Zone. And Rod Serling, as a visionary of the 1960s and beyond. You know, I did a webinar during the pandemic shutdown called The Twilight Zone in the Age of Corona, because so many of the great episodes were about isolation, man dislocated from reality, empty cities, people ganging up on science, all the things we went through. So the definition of art is it has to be of its time, but also timeless. And the fact that so many of these great episodes, especially the ones I write about in my book, I choose 68 out of the 156 episodes to write essays about. You know, just the other night on the rerun channel I get, they showed the episode with Jack Klugman, whose son is dying in Vietnam. This is September of 1963, when no American even knew where Vietnam was.
Yep.
This is a year before the Gulf of Tonkin incident that Johnson and company trumped up to declare an undeclared war on Vietnam. A year before, Serling has Klugman look into the camera and say, my kid is dying in a place called South Vietnam. There isn't even supposed to be a war going on there. This is a year before the Gulf of Tonkin.
Yes.
So Serling, that's just one episode.
Yeah.
So many of the episodes are both of its time and timeless. There's an episode that basically predates global warming called The Midnight Sun.
The Midnight Sun, yeah.
Earth is getting closer, right, to the sun. And then in true Twilight Zone twist ending, it turns out we're moving away from the sun.
Yeah, she's having a fever.
Yeah. But, you know, the other thing, let's say, about that episode that makes it also visionary, the lead character is a single woman living in New York City, and she's an artist. In 1961, all the other women on TV that were on TV were either screwball comedians like Lucille Ball or domesticated housewives like Donna Reed.
Yeah.
Serling had two daughters of his own, which is probably why he treated them as equals. And so many of the best Twilight Zone episodes don't have men in their center. They have independent women, not married, but you know what I mean? Serling was a visionary in that aspect. He cast black actors in dramatic roles in 1960 when there were no black people on TV. And he cast a black boxer because Serling boxed at bantamweight in World War II, where he was stationed in the Philippines.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump through my list here. I got to ask you now. So, you know, people always bring this up. Is it art imitating life or life imitating art when it comes to this stuff? And Serling, like all this stuff that you're pointing out, it makes me wonder how much has he programmed into the popular culture that now we see, big alien heads, and we're watching to serve a man, to serve humans.
Exactly. So I posit in my book, in my preface, that Serling and the Twilight Zone are the fathers of American popular culture. Now that sounds like a grand statement, but I end the book with my very last sentence where I repeat, Serling and the Twilight Zone are the fathers of American pop culture. And the 68 essays in between those two sentences are me stating the case. And what I mean by the fathers of American popular culture, if you look at our current science fiction, fantasy, and horror culture and the paranormal culture, I can trace every great element in those genres back to Serling and the Twilight Zone in less than 6 degrees of Serling. And I'm making a pun on the Kevin Bacon phrase, right? But it's true, because if you look at when the Twilight Zone came out, you know, Stephen King wrote a book called Dance Macabre in 1983, a nonfiction overview of the horror, science fiction, and fantasy fields. And he has a chapter devoted to the Twilight Zone. And in it, he says, and I'm paraphrasing, Serling and the Twilight Zone lit the sparks of my generation's imaginations to 1,000-fold of entrancing possibilities. And what he means by that is Stephen King and his peers, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, James Cameron, David Lynch, JJ, and their descendants, Chris Carter of the X-Files, Vince Gilligan, who worked on the X-Files and created Breaking Bad. When TV Guide interviewed him when the show ended, they said, Vince, people are calling Breaking Bad one of the greatest shows on television. How would you like your show to be remembered in the future? And Gilligan said, and again, I'm paraphrasing, if Breaking Bad can be talked about 50 years from now, like the way we talk about the Twilight Zone, you know, I'll be a happy boy. So you look at the influence that King was talking about. It lit the sparks of that generation's imaginations. And through them, we have our modern fantasy, science fiction, horror, paranormal culture. The influence of the Twilight Zone is so pervasive that it's almost invisible. But I've spent my career in my lectures, webinars, and my book pointing out all of these connections. I posit the Twilight Zone as the middle ground between the surrealism that preceded it and things like film noir that preceded it, and our modern culture, modern art, photography. Again, the influence is pervasive. David Lynch, who just passed away.
Yeah.
His masterpiece is Mulholland Drive.
Yep.
Okay, Blue Velvet, Eraserhead. No, Mulholland Drive was voted about 5 years ago as best film of the 21st century. When I saw it in 2001, when it opened, I declared then, this is going to be the best film of the 21st century. Why was it so brilliant, among other things? If you know the film, 3/4 of the way when Lynch twists the reality of the movie, where the characters you were seeing are still in the movie, but they're completely different characters. There's a Twilight Zone episode called Shadow Play, written by the great Charles Beaumont. He wrote 2 episodes that are about the nature of dreams and reality. One of them is called Perchance to Dream from season 1. Mm-hmm. The other is Shadow Play with Dennis Weaver, great American actor, McCloud, and many other things. He plays a convicted murderer on death row who has a recurring nightmare that he gets electrocuted every night. And he's trying to tell everybody around him that everything is a dream he's having. Of course, they think he's nuts. Well, you get to finally the end of the movie and you realize he was right. It is a recurring dream. Every night, the people are the same, but they're in different roles. I believe, and you know, I wish I could have interviewed David Lynch about this. When he talks about in interviews, when he got the inspiration to salvage Mulholland Drive, it was a failed television pilot. And he turned the footage into a 2-hour movie to salvage it. And how did he salvage it? It was the idea to twist reality. And he doesn't admit it that it's that Twilight Zone episode, but it absolutely was.
Yeah.
The same year Mulholland Drive came out, Cameron Crowe did the movie Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise, which was also about the nature of dreams and reality. And if you remember how that movie begins, somehow Tom Cruise was able to get Times Square completely shut down and deserted. Only Tom Cruise could have done that, right? And the character Cruise is playing is alone, deserted in Times Square, which, by the way, already sounds like a Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah.
Up on the Jumbotron, what does Cameron Crowe have playing? a clip from Shadow Play with Dennis Weaver. So Crow acknowledged that his movie and those themes about dreams and reality come right out of the Twilight Zone. Now, I'm not saying Serling invented, robots and science fiction. No. He adapted serious science fiction, which the rest of Hollywood and the entertainment thought science fiction was junk. Science fiction novels and short stories weren't considered great literature by the American literary establishment. That's why in the 50s, most science fiction were those ridiculous movies with the giant ants and things like that. Serling took science fiction seriously. The great Ray Bradbury stories and the great Richard Matheson stories that preceded the Twilight Zone. And what he did was he brought them to this relatively new medium of filmed television. Yes. Before that, he came out of the 50s when prestige TV was live television coming out of New York City. But when that died in the late 50s, it was too expensive and didn't get big enough ratings. Television shifted to Hollywood to film series. But to screenwriters like Paddy Chayefsky and Reginald Rose, who were Serling's peers in the 50s, they thought writing for television was déclassé. They wrote for the movies. Mm-hmm. But Serling loved television. That's where he made his bones. He won 3 Emmys in a row that gave him the creative clout to go out to LA to do the Twilight Zone. And because he was so respected as a writer, it was the first time a writer was in charge of a television show. What we call showrunners. Serling not only was the showrunner of the Twilight Zone, he owned it. The Twilight Zone was his concept. I call my book The 5 Themes of the Twilight Zone because I maintain that even the other writers, subconsciously or unconsciously, were writing to Serling's main themes, which I say in my book are science and superstition, suburban nightmares, a question of identity, obsolete man, and the time element. And within those 5 categories, I place essays of the greatest episodes of that theme. And in doing so, I'm making a case that these are the great, not all 156 episodes were equally great. Obviously, like any art form, not every painting Picasso made was great. And that goes for any artist. This is why musicians have outtakes and things that are in their vaults that they don't want people to hear because they're not the finished art. So I forgive the Twilight Zone for the more than half of its episodes that I consider dogs, a various level of dog, but churning out weekly television back in that time period, which was not recurring characters and sets. Anthology means every week you had to create a whole new world, new characters, new sets. That was pretty hard to do on a tight budget on a weekly basis. But I look at the 68 episodes that I felt were worthy of writing about, more like a baseball hitter's average. 68 out of 156 is like batting 430, which ain't bad, right? Yeah. Serling wrote 92 or 3 of the 156 episodes. Out of those, he wrote 41 of the 68 episodes I write about. And out of those 41 episodes, 12 of them are great adaptations. We'll talk about To Serve Man, one of the great science fiction episodes of the Twilight Zone. That was a great adaptation by Serling of Damon Knight's short story. But the thing is, 41 episodes out of 93, that's like batting 460. Yeah. So my point is, this, in this internet culture where everybody and everything has its own fan group, not every of the 156 episodes were great. Every art critic, every historian in any genre makes consensuses of what is the best. Nobody's done that for the Twilight Zone. Most episode guides, they feel like they have to cover all 156 episodes. I don't do that. And by doing that, I'm basically throwing down the gauntlet that these are the great episodes. And you know what? If you believe an episode you love that's not in my book is worthy of inclusion, write your own essay, publish your own book. But in doing so, that's how you create a consensus in any art form.
You know, you bring up David Lynch, and I'm seeing this image that Michelle put up behind her for her background, and it makes me think of Black Lodge. And so much of the right, and so much of this stuff that I saw with David Lynch and Twin Peaks. I mean, I don't know. I'm not that cultured of a guy, I guess. You know,
Hey, don't sell yourself short, brother.
I'm kind of long in the tooth, you know, and
oh, come on, I'm older than you.
but I thought Twin Peaks was an absolute just master.
What about Twin Peaks: The Return? Did you watch The Return? That was in 2017 on Showtime.
No, because I don't have Showtime.
18 one-hour episodes. At the end of the original Twin Peaks in 1992, one of the characters said something about we'll meet again in 25 years. Exactly 25 years later, he does Twin Peaks: The Return on Showtime. If you're a Twin Peaks fan, you have to, as soon as this episode is over, you better watch that.
Yeah.
There were some episodes, one in particular, that people who have seen it will know what I'm talking about. He uses the television screen itself like a canvas on which he basically paints his pictures. And if you know anything about Lynch, he started out as a painter in art school in Philadelphia. And when he realized that movies were paintings that move, that's what made him go into movies. But you owe it to yourself as a Twin Peaks fan to watch that. By the way, I thought the movie Fire Walk with Me that he put out in 92 when Twin Peaks ended, I thought was better than the TV series. I don't know about you.
Yeah. The
TV series started out great. And when he revealed the murderer, you know, midway through, I don't know, the second season, it fell apart. It felt like they were making it up as they went along. But in my mind, every Lynch movie had flaws in it until he got to Mulholland Drive, which I felt was a perfect film. And to say I was vindicated when the critics said it is the greatest movie of the 21st century, when he passed away, most of the obituaries did mention that Mulholland Drive is the acknowledged masterpiece. And I don't know if you guys have seen it or haven't seen it in a while.
Saw it when it first came out.
Yeah, but you know, getting back to Michelle's background, the concentric circle black and white design, the spinning vortex, is a perfect example of how even the graphics of the Twilight Zone, in my lectures and webinars, I show these, not only have their antecedents in surrealist graphics. The concentric circle is a design that started with the surrealists, but then it influenced American pop culture and fine art that followed the spinning vortex. Op art in New York City especially became a big thing in the early 60s along with pop art. Major exhibition in 1965 at the Museum of Modern Art about op art. And one of its progenitors was a female artist from Britain named Bridget Riley. She did a concentric circle painting dated 1962, a year after the Twilight Zone spinning vortex debuted on television. Remember Irwin Allen's TV show, The Time Tunnel?
Mm-hmm.
The Time Tunnel was basically the Twilight Zone vortex. And we still see this design in advertising imagery, in videos. But the bottom line is, again, Serling and his image makers didn't create these, but they adapted them from images that had come before and made them unique on television.
Yeah, because I remember as a kid when you would watch a TV show, and whenever was it Lou Abbott and Costello or any of these things, whenever they were gonna hypnotize somebody, that was what you saw. Right. You know,
that goes back to Marcel Duchamp, the famous, Dadaist painter, amongst other things. He created a series called roto reliefs that were spinning discs of the black and white circles. And again, the image of black and white circles goes back to the Jewish Kabbalah. There are images in Jewish mysticism of concentric black and white circles that each represent, some psychological or mystical level. So again, these are very human elements. The eyeball, the window, these are images from surrealist paintings by, Magritte and others. I did a coffee table art book called Visions from the Twilight Zone in 1990 with Chronicle Books. This is before the internet, before the Sci-Fi channel. And it's all about treating black and white art the television images like black and white art photography. And then I transcribed the dialogue and narration to read like poetry, right? But when you take off the dust jacket, embossed on the black and white cloth cover is the first image I can recall seeing as a child, sitting in front of my black and white television. I must have been 4.5 years old. And I saw that Twilight Zone eyeball, and that burned its way into my brain, like all the great surprise endings of the Twilight Zone. The Pig Faces episode, To Serve Man, which is basically a pun, but
To Serve Man.
Those are a part of our culture. Burgess Meredith breaking his glasses. These are parts of our culture that, again, when you're going through something in your life and something weird happens and you go, do, 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 do. When you hum the Twilight Zone music, you're acknowledging a moment of surrealist experience in your life that the original surrealists intended people to have. And that's what brings it full circle, and why the Twilight Zone is such an evergreen landmark. I mean, when they rate the greatest TV shows of all time, I always say, if aliens beamed down right now and said to me, Arlen, we have room on our spaceship for one Earth television show, what are you going to give them? Are you going to give them Breaking Bad? Are you going to give them The Sopranos? Are you going to give them I Love Lucy or Seinfeld? No. I'm giving them the Twilight Zone, or at least the 68 episodes, along with my book. And believe me, they will learn everything they need to know about mankind from those episodes.
Yeah. What do you think? Now, this just popped in my head. What do you think would happen if we had the technology, but we didn't have Rod Serling doing the Twilight Zone? Where do you think we would be? Do you think still
where we are today without Rod Serling? He dies in 1975, very young, 50 years old, from all those cigarettes he smoked.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And if you think about 1975, that's just when Spielberg made Jaws. That's just when Stephen King is coming to the fore with Carrie. Serling didn't live long enough to see the impact that the Twilight Zone would have on that generation Stephen King talked about in his book years later. They are all Serling's metaphorical children who went on to be inspired by him to create our current culture. But the fact that there is a podcast on Michigan UFO paranormal encounters is like the Mississippi River's The Twilight Zone, and all the tributaries that have come off of it in the last 65 years since its debut in 1959 are testament to the impact of Serling and the Twilight Zone to kindle the sparks in all of our imaginations to talk about things like, extraterrestrial encounters, etc. It all comes from the Twilight Zone seeding the culture. Serling and his writers, directors, and actors seeded the culture. And I'm telling you, it's all in my book within the essays that I write about. I point out all these tendrils and all of these tributaries during these essays And I recommend people, now that the Twilight Zone is streaming on Paramount Plus and Pluto TV, and I'm sure others,
Amazon Prime.
I recommend everybody watch the episode with your significant other, because these episodes' themes are for everybody, man, women, everybody. Watch the episodes in the order I write about them in my book, one at a time. Watch the episode first, form your own opinions, and then read my essay about that episode. If I've done my job, and I think I have, even the most ardent aficionado of the Twilight Zone, I think will think about something, learn about something, feel something about the episode that they've seen 1,000 times, just like I have, and just like you have, Michelle, and everybody has. I think I've done my job because I know that I can get those aficionados to think something new about these episodes. So imagine what it's going to do, not only for newbies, young people coming to the Twilight Zone for the first time, but for everybody in between. I guarantee you my essay will make you go back and rewatch the episode to see everything you might have missed.
We did that this morning with The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street.
Yes.
I've watched that probably 100 times, and we were still watching it and discussing it and things that I hadn't discussed with my students.
So what from my essay, was there anything specifically that made you think something different or new about the episode?
Wayne had wanted to watch it this morning. I know you had read the essay.
Yeah, I went through about 70% of the essays, and I don't remember if I got to that one or not.
You know what? We mentioned To Serve Man. Did you happen to read my essay on To Serve Man?
No, because I watched that one this morning.
Okay. How about we talk about an episode you did read my essay about? We can then talk about if it's something I shined you on to that maybe you didn't.
Yeah.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
No. Because I read these last night, because after
70% is a lot.
What's that?
70% is a lot.
Yeah. I got to the grave. I was reading The Grave, and we watched that one last night, and I absolutely love that episode. And you pointed out here, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, because you talk about that the set, the environment. Yes, that. Yep. The environment is like another character, and
Absolutely.
It's so well done. I mean, it makes
They
you
were
think.
stylized. They were stage sets.
Yeah.
I maintain the Twilight Zone were basically 2-act plays filmed for television. And they make no bones about the fact that they're set designs. And yet, just like a great Broadway play, a great set can evoke reality. Not only that graveyard, but that's the aerial shot of the graveyard.
Dude,
that
so
whole
cool.
backdrop is either a photograph or a painting of a western horizon. But all of the trees and the way they're bent and twisted and the graves.
Yes.
The set designers of the Twilight Zone, along with the director of photography, all of the creative people, when I interviewed them for my books years ago, they all said, we loved working for Serling because he was a creative man, letting everybody be creative. It was like Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater. Serling was like the auteur of the Twilight Zone. And because he was so respected as an Emmy Award-winning writer, back then TV shows were in charge of by account executives, advertising people, not creative people. Serling was. So everybody loved wanted to work with Serling. You know, the great composer Bernard Herrmann, who composed all of Hitchcock's great films, Psycho, etc., he did Twilight Zone original soundtracks for episodes. Back when, at a time, he didn't have to work in television, but he wanted to work with Serling, and he respected the Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone, like Star Trek after it, wasn't big in the ratings, but it was a critic's darling. It won 2 Emmys for its writing by Serling and Company, and 1 Emmy for its photography by George C. Clemens, a direct descendant, by the way, of Samuel T. But anyway, so the Twilight Zone was respected by the creative community in Hollywood. And that's why all the up and coming actors who later became stars, it's like a who's who of 20th century Hollywood. Everybody from Robert Redford, Charles Bronson, Robert Duvall. I mean, the list goes on. Burt
Marvin.
We're all in Twilight Zone episodes. And the women actresses, Elizabeth Montgomery was in it, Anne Francis, so many great. Cloris Leachman was in It's a Good Life, where Billy Mooney sends the kids into the cornfield. So yeah, it was a who's who of Hollywood, and the quality of the acting in all of these great episodes, and I talk about this in my book, is so intense. You could feel the anxiety as these characters they're playing, as their reality is being shifted. Vera Miles in Mirror Image, she was the sister in Psycho. But in Mirror Image, she thinks she sees a duplicate of herself in the bus station. When she describes, towards the end of the episode, what she thinks is the theory that people from another dimension are replacing us, which, by the way, is a very meta mention of Invasion of the Body Snatchers that Serling was basically putting in. And nobody was doing meta other than Serling, right? In that time period. But basically, when Vera Miles is describing the intensity, you can see her eyes glazing over in this delusion. And the same thing with the male actors. That's what also makes the Twilight Zone so great, is that not only were the scripts fantastic, but the actors and the directors and what they got out of 25 minutes. You could teach the Twilight Zone as a primer to young directors and storytellers. The art of storytelling in 25 minutes, these great episodes, they suck you in to the situation in like 30 seconds and you're hooked. Yeah. And then you get the halfway, cliffhanger. And then you come back for Act 2, which builds to the great surprise ending. Again, Serling didn't invent surprise endings. They go back to literary O. Henry. Alfred Hitchcock did them for years. Mm-hmm. But we don't talk about the surprise endings in Alfred Hitchcock episodes. But we do talk about Serling perfected the surprise ending with the Twilight Zone.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, the Perchance to Dream episode. And I wrote something here about that. And
did you read my essay to that?
Yes.
Well, then absolutely. I want to talk to you about a specific thing in that episode.
Okay, well, maybe we're going to talk about the same thing here. Because I've always wondered, are we actually living right now, or are we going through, are we on our deathbeds right now? We're just reliving all the things that we've done in the matter of a second or two. And then I watched this episode, and Serling in his episode says, they say a dream takes only a second or two. And yet,
Coleman wrote that episode.
Yeah. Well, yes,
and then he says, it only a second or two. Go on. I'm sorry.
Well, and then he says, and yet in that second, a man can live a lifetime. And that's what made me start thinking, wow, what if we're on our deathbed right now, and we're playing the tape in our head.
Thanks for that happy thought.
I know, right?
Anything else to inspire us today, Wayne? And please tell me.
We're very depressed over
If
here.
you read that essay, there's something very specific I point out about that episode.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, what about the Matrix?
Well, right? Again, all these movies, and in my lectures and webinars, I talk about the Twilight Zone's influence on movies and television shows that came after. And this whole idea that we are in this manipulated reality, again, goes back to shadow play. It goes back to an episode called 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, which, remember, they turn out to be dolls. Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Story. But basically, that's the plot. But that's not what that episode's about. We're 3 billion characters in search of an exit. We're all trapped in our circular conundrums trying to get out. That's what life is about. And in 25 minutes, that episode, again, an adaptation by Serling of somebody else's story, is about all these different theories and philosophies about what we're supposed to be doing in life. And this is in 25 minutes on a TV show that aired in 1961 when every other TV show was a Western or a comedy. These episodes must have been like alien transmissions beamed down to Earth compared to the surrounding culture. And when you watch Five Characters in Search for an Exit, which is in my top 5, and I usually show that to newbies, especially young people, because to me, that episode, it's graphic, it's simple. They're trapped in a circular white conundrum. And how they get out or don't get out is, of course, fascinating. And, to people coming to the Twilight Zone for the first time, I think it's a perfect episode to introduce to them how much you can discuss in 25 minutes.
Yeah. In going back to that perchance to dream, I just was giggling at the end where they're like, oh, you heard that scream he did. And then it's like a heart, he says he died of probably a heart attack. And he says there's probably worse ways to go. At least he died peacefully. Like he jumped out the window. He just took off right through the window and jumped out the window. And his, in his head, that's what he did.
Right.
But the like you mentioned here, some of the words, the doctor's name is Rothman, which is means doctor in Jewish. What was the other thing? Maya.
That's his allusion to the idea that he's a Jewish psychiatrist.
Yes. Yeah.
Rothman, yeah.
Yeah, and then Maya, and this was a great episode, and it just made me think more and more, those lovely thoughts of, man, are we just reliving our life tape right now? Are we really in the Matrix? Okay, what's simulation theory? What's going on here? So what more did you want to talk about this? The acting in it was the woman, the actress, what was her name?
Suzanne Lloyd, who played Maya, the cat girl.
Oh my God, dude. The eyes in the mirror.
Well, yeah.
It was just really good. The whole episode, or the scene of going on the
roller coaster.
The roller coaster. I mean, I don't know.
You don't know what? What don't you know?
My brain was just blown up. I mean, I guess that's the best way I can say it. It's like there's so much going on in that 20-some minutes.
Did you watch that episode too, Perchance to Dream?
I did watch the episode with him last night.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you read my essay about it?
I did not read the essay yet.
Okay, well, Wayne, I'm calling you out on this, man. I don't think you read my essay about it.
I did.
Well, there's something major in it that you're not bringing up.
Let's see. I even have it right here.
Yeah, we should take 5 minutes out. You should.
Where?
So once again, there's the plot of the episode.
Right.
But then I get to the heart of what was that episode really about. And a couple of paragraphs before the end of the essay, I tell you what I think the episode is about.
Beyond that, dreams versus reality is one of male sexual obsession.
Yeah, why don't you read the rest of my essay for the enlightenment and
So at the end here, after they talk about the, is it a heart attack? Probably. Well, I guess there's worse ways to go. At least he died peacefully. And then what is the most remarkable about Perchance is how absolutely modern this enigmatic episode is.
And Michelle, this is especially for you to pay attention to what he's going to read now.
As its underlying theme, beyond that of dreams versus reality, which was kind of where I was stuck,
Of course.
is one of male sexual obsessions. If you've been listening closely to Hall's and Maya's revealing dialogue throughout the episode,
Right.
you'll come to the conclusion that Hall has been stalking the secretary of his psychiatrist after having seen her earlier on the streets. Remember his words, right?
He actually says that when the Rathman asks him, when he's recounting this dream with this woman, Maya, he goes, "Is this a girl you've known in your life?" And the character goes, "I don't think so. Maybe it's somebody I saw on the street." He actually says that. So I say to the reader at that point in my essay, remember these words. Okay, now finish reading my essay, Wayne.
So it says, in his feverish, guilt-ridden mind, Hall conjured up what is that word? Lascivious Maya persona and projected it onto her. Those were her eyes, in the rearview mirror of his car, to blame her for his suppressed sexuality, to demonize her for inextraordinarily drawing him to his death. But by blaming her, he killed himself. Talk about blaming the victim.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's an example of what. That's why I'm glad you brought it up. In terms of making you look at this episode that some people have seen 1,000 times. But I bet you they might not have thought of the angle that I talk about in those last couple of paragraphs. Michelle, do you see that now that you've watched the episode?
Well, I see how she appeared when she was the receptionist. Very wholesome, very would have been the 1950s, 1960s household wife. But in his dream, she was absolutely scandalous.
Yeah.
And he blames her. Basically, he's the stalker, but he's blaming the woman for making him stalk her.
Yeah, for trying to kill him.
Which is what, Michelle, as a woman, this is still being adjudicated in the courts when a woman cries rape. What does the prosecution always do? They try to make it blame her. Oh, well, you dressed very provocatively. Mm-hmm. Because men can't be trusted to suppress our own sexual urges, that we blame women for making us not be in control, which is one of the biggest problems women have with men. And it's men's biggest problems about their egos that has real consequences on women. I mean, I know I've never done it to a woman, but plenty of men have. And for that episode to air in 1959 and have this subtextual message that this man was stalking this woman and in his own mind blamed her for his sexual obsession.
Do you think that he was necessarily stalking her, though, or it was just perchance because he would see her when he would go to therapy?
An appointment to see that psychiatrist because he stalked her and realized she worked for the psychiatrist. So he made an appointment to go see her. I'm not making this up, you know.
We've been waiting for you, Mr. Hall.
Exactly. Yeah. And she repeats that line as Maya when they're in the tunnel of love. Yep. All of a sudden, Maya goes, "We've been expecting you, Mr. Hall." Again, when you watch the episode again after reading my essay, I guarantee you will watch it differently.
And what is the tunnel of love?
I call it a labial metaphor. Labial?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Whoa, you know, train going into the tunnel. Come on.
Yeah, it's pretty blatant when you start after you've read this, you know, because I read this last night after we watched this, and I read it last night.
Yeah, but you obviously missed the last 3 paragraphs.
No, I did, but you know, I don't know.
How many times did I prompt you to say there was something more important about that episode, and you didn't come up with it?
Well, you know, I don't.
Wayne, I'm like a teacher. I'm grading you. And I'm taking little demerits because you claim you read the essay, but but you didn't glean the most important part of it.
Well, maybe I was going too fast, or I'm just kind of jaded in some of this stuff.
There's no excuses. I worked for a great comic book artist when I came out of art school. He was one of the gods of comic book art named Neil Adams, who recently passed away a couple of years ago. But in the late 60s and early 70s, he was one of the gods of comic book art. And I got to work for him, one of my childhood idols. And his level of drawing and realism was on a bar nobody could touch. And therefore, his standards, his work standards were that high. And if you were working for a guy like that, you had to up your standards. And, that's something I carry with me to this day in the work that I do. But yeah, you expect it from other people, but they didn't get to work for Neil Adams and learn about higher standards.
Yeah. There was something I had written down here. I typed it up over here. It says, like a bunch.
Hey, let's hear from Michelle. Michelle, I want to hear from you. Enough with Wayne. Wayne, come on. Equal time. Michelle, you got to about the Twilight Zone.
Which one? Because I will be personally honest, I have not read any of your essays yet.
Anything you want to talk about.
What are your thoughts about the invaders? I'll take you back to the first episode that I ever watched. I was 10 years old and it scared the mess out of me.
With the great Agnes Moorehead, who would later play Endora on Bewitched.
And Agnes Moorehead who would also do the voice for Mrs. Stevenson with Sorry, Wrong Number by Lucille Fletcher.
Okay. Also, she was the mother of Citizen Kane.
Yep.
If you remember the beginning.
Rose.
I write about that episode, and I mention that when I interviewed the director of the episode, Douglas Hayes, who also directed the Pigface Eye, the Beholders episodes, and some of the other great Twilight Zone episodes. I mentioned him, I said, Agnes Moorehead, she barely has any dialogue. She grunts, she groans, but she's almost like a mime. In her performance, I use the word mimetic. And Douglas Hayes looked at me and he goes, Arlen, did you know that she studied with Marcel Marceau, the great French mime? When everybody thinks about a mime, Marcel Marceau is like the mime of the 20th century. And she studied with him. I don't know whether it was specifically for this role, but that's one of the things I talk about in the essay. It's one of the great episodes also for that reason. There is no clear dialogue or narration until the very end of the episode when the little invaders that you think are aliens are actually humans. Classic perspective change. And again, this was not a Rod Serling episode. This was a Richard Matheson episode, I think adapted from his own short story. But interesting about that episode, if you remember what the aliens or Earthmen look like, they look like little Michelin men, I call them. Richard Matheson so hated the way they looked on the episode that 10 years later, he would rewrite that episode as a short story about a woman in New York City living alone, being chased around her apartment by a little Zuni hunting fetish.
Trilogy of terror.
Trilogy.
With, jagged teeth and a spear. Yep. If you've seen that episode, it was called Trilogy of Terror.
Absolutely. The necklace falls off. That's it.
With Karen Black, that great early 70s actress, right? And basically, that was Richard Matheson rewriting Invaders with a little character that he was a lot more happy with than he was with the Michelin Men. But again, in my essay, I show how back then in the late 50s, early 60s, when the space program was just launched, if you look at researchers for NASA and their conceptions of Earth spacesuits, many of them are bulbous like the ones that the Twilight Zone had on in the Invaders. So they weren't that far-fetched, but still, Matheson hated them.
That was the one where I would always say, Danger, Will Robinson.
Yeah, they are. Nice, Wayne. I like the way you got that right up, baby. And to the right is a science fiction illustration that I found on the internet that have that bulbous look of the little invaders.
Mhm.
And you know, the other great Richardson Matheson episode with William Shatner called Nightmare at 20,000 Feet that I write an essay about. You know, the gremlin on the wing that freaks everybody out? Matheson hated the look of it. I talk about this in my essay. It looks like a furry ape suit when he's leaning down on the fuselage on the wing. You can see his plastic feet of the costume he's wearing. Matheson hated it. People love that episode, but Matheson hated the gremlin. So again, a decade or so, 2 decades or so later, when Spielberg makes Twilight Zone the movie, 1983, one of the 4 episodes was a remake of that with John Lithgow in the Shatner role. And the gremlin on the wing is, you know, modern 80s special effects. To me, it's dismissible, but Matheson supposedly was happier with that than the gremlin with the furry feet.
You know, do you think that Serling had any insight into like real world UFO or government secrecy that was going on during this time about this?
You know, again, I don't know. I can't say for sure because I'm not that aware of that level of Serling knowledge. Maybe there's other authors who have written biographies of Serling that might know. But, you know, I would venture a guess based on the fact that he loved science fiction, which, again, was also about extraterrestrials and all the same issues. I wouldn't be surprised if he, you know, believed in some of that, you know, because he was such a lover of the genre.
It's interesting. Now, one question I haven't asked you yet, and it goes way back to the beginning here, is besides that eyeball that caught your attention when you were a little kid watching TV, what drew you to doing a topic like this on, or a book about this kind of topic? And with Serling, is there something like drawing you to wanting to talk about this?
Well, you know, in the late 70s, when I was in art school in Rhode Island School of Design, that's when the concept of video art was entering the fine art world. And what video art back then was back in the old TV sets, you used to manipulate the horizontal and vertical in the back, and the TV screen would form all those abstract, weird patterns. So artists were doing that and taking pictures of the TV screen and printing them out in full color and hanging them in galleries as art. And there must have been an exhibition at Rhode Island School of Design, and I saw it, and I remember thinking, you know, I always loved the Twilight Zone. I love the black and white look. And, you know, you could flip around the dial. There were other black and white shows, I Love Lucy and whatever. But when you landed on the Twilight Zone, it had a look hard to describe, but you knew it was different. And it was the Twilight Zone. Part of that is they were filmed. They're actually miniature films. They weren't shot on videotape, but they were shot on either 16 or 35 millimeter film. And that's why when you watch the Blu-ray transfers today from the original films, they look like they were shot yesterday in some experimental theater in the East Village in New York City. They're so crisp and clean and fresh. So I thought, you know, I bet you I could take pictures of the Twilight Zone just like these video artists are taking pictures of these abstract images, like who cares? But the Twilight Zone images would be beautiful black and white, like the art photography that, again, was coming into vogue in the mid-70s. You know, the Museum of Modern Art didn't establish a photography department until 1975. 50 years ago, was when Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run, that album cover came out, which is one of the greatest album covers of all time. And it's one of the greatest black and white photographs of the 20th century by Eric Miola.
Yeah.
I'm moderating a panel for my local Westport, Connecticut library this spring on the 50th anniversary of Born to Run. And I designed the logo Born to Run at 50 using that great black and white image. So I kept that idea in mind. And then in the early 80s, when I found out Bantam Books was going to do a book called The Twilight Zone Companion by Mark Zickery, the first episode guide to the Twilight Zone. You know, when you go to a bookstore now, there's a whole section devoted to books about television. In 1982, there was one book about a TV show, The Making of Star Trek. That was it. The Twilight Zone Companion is the second book about a TV show. I tried to be art director of that book. I was working in New York City, and I put together a dummy book where I took pictures of Twilight Zone episodes and created a proposal. I sent it to Bantam. They sent it back with a cover letter saying they're going to do the book in-house, but thank you for sending your idea. So I was left with all these art book ideas for how I would talk about the Twilight Zone in book form. Well, it only took 10 years, but I finally got that idea published in this book. And ever since that book came out, I started writing capsule descriptions of my favorite episodes to go along with promoting that book. And those are the same capsule descriptions that over the last 30 years, I kept expanding until the finished essays that are in my current book.
Well, before I get to that question, a Life with Bobby pops up a question. And when you were talking about the way that the episodes seem so different, she says, like aiming a camera at an LCD screen slightly out of focus. Weren't they using very new type of, like with the boxing one? I think you make mention of it in your essay about there was a piece of glass that they were filming up out of.
Right.
So
shot from under the canvas.
Yeah. So wasn't a lot of that stuff new, brought about by the Twilight Zone?
Well, you know, again, you got to be an expert in the history of film to answer that. I don't know if that, you know, I'm sure guys like Orson Welles were doing things like that. But again, for television, you had a modest income. There were 2 boxing episodes that both have, if you look at Raging Bull by Scorsese, the way he filmed the boxing scenes, very stylized. He doesn't film necessarily on location in a real arena. I think a lot of those setups are on sets, and you're made to feel like there's an audience there by the way he crops. And I point that out, that if you watch these 2 Twilight Zone boxing episodes, they're shot in black and white. They're very closely cropped, and less is more. They can somehow indicate a whole arena without shooting in a real arena. And that is just part and parcel of what makes the Twilight Zone so fresh visually when you watch these episodes, is that they're using classic techniques of editing and camera setups to evoke more than what's actually there. And that's very stylized, and it works beautifully on television.
I think Lynch did that same kind of work. So, yeah.
And this is what I'm saying about the influence of the Twilight Zone. You know, good luck finding any other commentator that's compared those boxing episodes to Raging Bull. I would venture that I'm the only one that's pointed that out.
Yeah. What about this question? I know you're not doing a biography of Serling, but do you know if he hung out with like Crowley or Jack Parsons?
Again,
these guys?
Again, I don't know that. I don't know if anybody knows that, but
yeah,
he did know Ray Bradbury. And he went to Bradbury when he started the Twilight Zone and said, Ray, you are familiar with all these great science fiction writers who are mostly based in Southern California. Can you recommend some that I could hire to write for the Twilight Zone? And it was Bradbury that suggested Matheson and Beaumont, probably among others. Now, if you know anything about that coterie of science fiction writers that all were based in Southern California, you know, I'm sure there are historians of those guys that will tell you if they were into everything that you mentioned, and I bet you they were. They were science fiction writers.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they have been aware of all that stuff before the rest of the populace in America was aware of that? Again, I'm not an expert in science fiction to that level.
Well, let's talk about you for a minute. So,
Me?
yeah, because here's the thing. I've heard this from a lot of people, and this is kind of a question. When they start diving deep into supernatural and paranormal topics and things like that, then they start to attract some high strangeness into their life. It almost like it calls in weird things to start happening. Have you ever experienced any kind of strange synchronicities or unexplained phenomena while working on this Twilight Zone book, besides just normal people?
Bring that up because I've got the perfect story.
Okay.
When I did my first book, I wanted to credit whoever designed the Twilight Zone logo, which is one of the great television logos of all time, right? When I was in LA, I got to interview the original producer, Buck Houghton. Nobody seemed to know. I talked to people who were involved in Hollywood, who were shooting titles. Nobody knew who designed the logo of the Twilight Zone. So when my book came out in 1990, I couldn't credit the logo. So in 1992, I moved out of New York City to where I live now in Westport, Connecticut. And I knew Serling had lived here in the mid-50s when he was commuting into New York City to work on those live television plays that won him the Emmys, again, that got him out to LA to do the Twilight Zone. So I went to the Westport Library, very prestigious, state-of-the-art library, with a copy of my hardcover book to donate it to the library in case they didn't have it, given that Serling had lived here. So I go up to the middle-aged receptionist, a woman, and I pull the book out and I go into my spiel, and she looks up at the book cover and she goes, "You know, my husband designed that logo." Okay.
Mic drop.
My jaw dropped. Cue the Twilight Zone music. Are you kidding me? Okay, you ready for this? She's married to a guy named Joe Messerly. They live in Fairfield, the next town over from Westport. I go to meet Joe Messerly. He's a guy in his mid-60s. Remember, this is 1992. He's in his mid-60s. He looks like a Southern rockabilly guy, still with his pompadour, skin-tight jeans, and leather snakeskin boots. That's Detroit muscle. They're doing the E Street Shuffle. Okay. He was a gentleman, soft-spoken. He told me the story. I said, "Joe, you designed the Twilight Zone logo. How?" He goes, "Arlen, I grew up in Texas, and in the late 50s, there was no work for a young graphic designer. I go out to LA, and I end up getting a job in the CBS art department. And one day in 1959, I get the job order, come up with a logo for the Twilight Zone." In 1992, he was a kind of semi-retired cartoonist doing like funny animal illustrations for licensing. And he almost didn't even realize what an icon the Twilight Zone had become. So that's one Twilight Zone story. And I'll tell you another just related one. You know the famous music? Do-do-do-do, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So the very first theme of the Twilight Zone in the first season, 1959 to 60, Bernard Herrmann, who I mentioned before, does the Twilight Zone theme. It's not the do-do-do-do theme. It's more of a somber Bernard Herrmann theme. But going into the second season of the show, I guess maybe he wanted more money. They didn't want to pay his light, whatever it was. They needed a new theme ASAP. The Twilight Zone producer, Buck Houghton, was in Europe at the time, and they needed a theme right away. So he puts out a call to European composers to come up with a theme for his show, The Twilight Zone. And a 26-year-old French composer named Marius Constant comes up with the do-do-do-do theme. And he wins, and they pay him $200. He stays in Europe, in France, for the next 25 years. In 1985, he comes to New York City to work on a play by the opera impresario Peter Sellers, not the actor, the other Peter Sellers. And he's having dinner with the young cast members after opening night. And they asked him what other shows or what other music had he composed that they, a young American troupe, would know about. So Constant is thinking, you know, what would this American audience say? He goes, 25 years ago, I composed the theme for this show. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called The Twilight Zone. According to Constant, the young cast members reacted as if he had written Beethoven's Ninth. So the logo and the music, two icons, basically have similar stories.
What do you think Serling, if he was alive today, would make of the whole UFO disclosure movement? You know, he was a military guy. Obviously, we talked about him being, you know, a doctor. So
listen, the phrase the Twilight Zone, as much as historians can figure out, is when an airplane is coming in to land on an aircraft carrier, and you get to that point in your descent where your equilibrium, you don't know whether you're up or down or north or whatever it is. They call that brief period before you regain your equilibrium the Twilight Zone. Serling, being a paratrooper, must have heard that. And maybe that's how he came up with the Twilight Zone. I don't think he ever revealed where he came up with the name. That's pretty much what it comes from.
But, okay, so what do you think he would think of all of this UFO people, all their stories and things?
Well, you know, given his, you know, already deep interest in science fiction and fantasy, I would imagine he would be open-minded to it. And, you know, but I think also, you know, he wrote episodes about aliens coming. There's an episode, again, not in my book. And, you know, even these lesser episodes have something in them. It could be a line of dialogue or an actor's performance. In the episode The Gift, it's about an alien that comes to Mexico, of all places, and wants to give a gift of his technology to Earthmen. But, of course, they're afraid of him. They think he's a dangerous alien, and they shoot him dead. And the gift he was going to give gets burned up in a fire. And Serling has the characters say, you know, God sent his own son to Earth 2,000 years ago, and look at what they did to him. And I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
Now, Serling, nice Jewish boy, born on Christmas Day, but his wife was Unitarian, which goes back to the 16th century. They believe in God, but not in the Trinity. They don't believe in Jesus' divinity. But they're a very open-minded branch of Christianity that accepts a lot of different ideas. And they're not dogmatic. And Serling was attracted to that because Judaism has a very strong, liberal, open-minded streak, especially to internal debate and discussion. It's not dogmatic. And Serling was attracted to that. So he writes basically a little bit of Christology into this episode, The Gift. So Serling obviously had sympathies that lean towards alien encounters, paranormal activity. Again, listening to your introduction, all of the topics you mentioned, I could connect to Twilight Zone episodes.
Yeah. Hey, well, I think you nailed it when you said he seeded the where we are now with everything and putting that into the consciousness of
to
people.
The point where people don't even, like I said, the influence of Twilight Zone is so pervasive as to be almost invisible. But not to people like me, because I love pointing out and making them visible. And giving Serling the credit. And again, if you read my book, tell me if you agree that it is the father of American popular culture. Have I made my case with my essays? That's up to the reader to decide.
Right. And speaking of that, as we get ready to wrap it up here, because we're going on an hour and a half, do you want to tell people?
I thought we just skimmed the tip of the iceberg.
Well, no, I'm watching the timer. So do you want to tell people about where to find your book? And
they can go right to my website, arlenschumer.com, and there's a dedicated subpage where you can order the book, pay through PayPal, and I'll sign it for you and ship it out. So that's the best way. And make sure you just spell my name right. There you go. Arlen Schumer, all one word.com.
Yep. And what do you got?
And my whole life is up there. There's other Twilight Zone pages that show you all my other works over the years that you'll enjoy if you're a Twilight Zone fan. And my speakers engagement page is linked to my Vimeo channel, which has videos of so many Twilight Zone webinars I've done. Twilight Zone in the Age of Corona, Twilight Zone in its relation to comic books, because I'm also a comic book historian. At Twilight Zone and film noir, I posit that some of the greatest episodes are like film noir on television. And those are all on my Vimeo channel, linked from my website, speaker engagements page.
Okay. All right. Well, Arlen, I'm going to tell you, it's been great on this Super Bowl Sunday. Great conversation.
We've had our own Super Twilight Zone Bowl.
Yeah. Everybody get to his website and order that book. And let's do some deep dives. So
thanks for having me on, guys. And anytime you want to talk Twilight Zone, I'm always available to you.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you very much, as we're going to close everything out.
Thank you, Arlen.
All right. So, Michelle, did you ever think that deeply about the Twilight Zone? I mean, it's kind of like there in your face.
With Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, yes, because I had to discuss the themes of it with the kids.
Yeah.
So that they could dig a little bit before, or below the surface.
Yeah.
Like I said, the first episode that I ever watched was The Invaders. And that sized all the fact that we even brought up the Trilogy of Terror, just that little doll with the necklace and the knife.
Yeah, that one sticks with you for a while. Or the ventriloquist dummy type of thing, right? I always hated
anything
things
involving dolls, but I'm also one of those that dolls didn't bother me, neither did clowns, until the movie Poltergeist and that stupid clown doll.
See, I've always hated clowns and kangaroos.
Well, and dolls, I mean, I used to collect porcelain dolls. I used to have them hanging on my bedroom wall. They never bothered me, like whether or not they were coming to life in the middle of the night. So they would freak the mess out of my cousin.
Yeah.
So, but
all right. Well,
it's definitely taken me back many, many years.
Yeah.
I mean, literally has taken me back 40 years to when I watched my first episode.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't even remember how young I was when I saw my first one. I might've been 4 or 5. I don't know. So I grew up with older brothers and sisters, and they would watch things like that. So I don't know.
It gives a new perspective when you're an adult watching them, though.
Yeah. And I guess I wasn't prepared for how deep some of these things actually were,
But look at what we were saying last night. I could not have remembered, what was it, shooting an arrow up into the air.
Yeah.
And as soon as it got started, I just looked at the backdrop and I go, that's the Sierra Nevadas.
Yeah.
Like, knew right away. I'm like, they never left the planet.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that goes to where they went with and I think Arlen talks about it in his essay about that, about you blew it up, right? The Planet of the Apes. And
yep.
And there's part of the Statue of Liberty sitting there, right? And
I don't know. I just love when I finally got to the sign and we were like, was it Arizona? Was it Nevada? And then see the sign for Reno. I'm like, closer.
Yep. All right, everybody. Remember, hit that subscribe button, join the membership, get a shout out. We really appreciate you guys coming here for a different type of show today, and early show and all that good stuff. And we're going to turn around and get this put out as a audio podcast here very shortly. But we just want to thank everybody for joining us on this Sunday, and it's Super Bowl, and everybody have a good time and don't go too crazy. You still have to work tomorrow, some of us. So, don't get too under the drinky drink, right? So with that being said, Michelle,
have a great Sunday, everyone.
Have a great Sunday and enjoy the football game. And remember, keep your eyes to that
sky.